So today we're talking about the difference between rehabbing athletes and general population clients. Maybe why sometimes athletes are easier to work with, sometimes they're harder to work with, but the main thing is what lessons we can apply and take forward with all of our clients. So, Tash, I want to open up with what well, let's start with one reason or some reasons why athletes might be easier to work with than general population clients.
So I reckon, like a lot of the time, athletes are a lot easier because for example, if they're injured, they're not able to train to their optimal potential or anything like that. And if, for example, they want to hit a certain level of performance, whether that's hitting a right time or lifting a certain weight or whatever it might be, if they're not able to do that because of this injury, they're going to try and do everything that they can to try and make sure that they can get to the point. So I tend to find they like to be a lot more compliant basically with any of the rehab that you give them or any of the advice you give them, because they know that if they don't do that, the time frame in terms of when they're going to get better is going to either be longer or short lived if they return back to the sport quicker than they should, or whatever like the reasons might be. So that's like the main reason I find that athletes might be, I guess you would say, easier to work with, because they also they also are so used to having a sort of structure with their training, and like they'll be like, right, okay, I have training 5 days a week, so they're used to allocating time into the sport or into something. So if I'm like, right, you will now need to adjust your schedule to be able to allocate X amount of time to do this rehab, whether that is before training, whether it's after training, whether it's in your day-to-day life or whatever, like they're so used to being able to do that. So it makes it easier for them to actually want to put the time into it. Whereas people who might not necessarily have a sport to be able to compete towards or train towards, or like maybe you're more gem pop people, if they don't have that sort of routine, it's hard for them to think when they can try and fit it in, or they kind of think
Yeah.
like, oh well, I've done it once or twice, that's fine. And it's just like it's just not how it works. Whereas athletes see how doing something more gives you that progression towards something. Like the more you train, the better you get. So the more you do your rehab, the better you'll feel, sort of thing. And they just have that sort of mindset that helps them actually want to commit to it.
Mm, big time. Yeah. Really, really well put. I think both the cost and the benefit for an athlete are higher. So them not being able to train or do their sport, that cost feels way more
Massively.
painful than somebody having a little ache or pain, but it doesn't really get in the way of their day-to-day life. If they're an athlete, then it's a huge part of their life. So they really suffer and don't enjoy their injured status. And also the benefit of getting better,
Yeah,
returning to sport or seeing the progress in training again, I think is a big pull. So both the carrot and the stick are
yeah,
stronger for them. And yeah, that's definitely my experience as well, that they're just bought in and motivated to a much greater extent because
yeah,
their physicality and athleticism is so important to them. Um, cool.
yeah.
And yeah, I guess what might be the downside of that? Why might athletes be more difficult to work with in some scenarios?
um, I would sometimes they want a quick fix because they want to get back to the sport as quick as possible, and they're like, I've got a competition in 3 weeks' time, so I need to be better for then. And it's like, okay, let's just wave my magic wand and it's going to be fine. Like it doesn't work like that. And I think there's sometimes, and how do I word it? Like it's not being handheld. Like that's not necessarily the best term to put it in, but like if you don't give them stuff that is suitable in terms of their training. So, for example, like the one thing that I have found, and the one thing that how I structure a lot of rehab is making sure that it is accommodating to their training schedule. as well as their lifestyle. So if I give them too much, they won't do it. Like they just won't do them. And so you've got to make sure that the rehab is actually applicable to them, because half the time they look at it and they're like, I'm bored now. Like I want to get back to training. So I'm just going to start training again because my rehab's like a bit boring. So let's just carry on. So you've got to be, it's, that's not necessarily the athlete's fault. It's the communication between the two of you. But if someone has like a very short deadline to get better in, you've got to, it's kind of being like, right, well, you either do this in pain or we do as best as we can to do it, but I'm not going to be able to get your chronic patellar tendinopathy better before you go and do world championships. Like I can't do that in like 3 weeks. Like we can get it to a level where it's better, but I'm not going to be able to get that level of performance to that point. Like we could get you like to a level of pain free, but it doesn't mean to say that it's going to get, and it's trying to manage that, like the athlete's expectations. Like that's probably more, it's managing their expectations of how long recovery and rehab and getting them back to where we want them to be, if not better, is going to take. And sometimes they can be a bit impatient. And I
Yeah,
said
for
it.
sure. I think
Yeah.
because yeah,
I said
I
it.
think most of them would probably admit to that. I think yeah, it goes back to the stakes being higher. I think it leads to a lot of more maybe uncomfortable conversations because they so clearly want to compete, or they may want to go to a certain competition, and they're almost trying to talk you into saying that it's going to be okay when you know it's not going to be okay. And because it means so much to them, you're quite often having to deliver less than ideal news and tell them something that they don't want to hear. And some of the situations this has brought up for me have been where their ambitions or their aspirations are in direct conflict with what I think is best for their body.
Yeah.
So you're almost getting into an argument with them about what they should do. And at the end of the day, it's their body. They can do with it what they want,
Yeah.
but trying to give them fair and balanced information to make an informed decision with, to say, I think you need to take a bit of time off competing and fix a few of these things, which will be better for you long term, and even long term as an athlete in many situations. But they're like, well, this is the big competition I want to go to. I just want you to patch me up and get me as good as I can be for that competition. And yeah, there's a few people that come to mind in this sort of situation. And yeah, I think I felt very morally conflicted because, you know, we basically had done that for two competitions before, and you sort of patched them up. They put in a good performance.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, right, after this, you've won. Now we need to have a little off season, have a little bit of rebuilding. Like, oh no, I want to go to this next competition. And you're like, how long is this
Just,
going to go for? Like,
I
how many
just don't
times can
care.
we do this? Yeah, we're doing this dance again.
Yeah.
And uh, yeah, it's quite a hard line to balance to strike. Yeah, have you had anything like that? Any advice for people if they're in that situation?
Yeah, there's a lot of times I've had that conversation where it has been like, okay, I've got a competition in 3 weeks. And I just say to them, I was like, right, I was like, we're not even going to bother doing anything super structured right now, because at the end of the day, we need to just get you into this competition. So no matter what I give you, there might not be a massive effect. So I give them, we just focus on trying to get pain relief, getting them to a point where they can compete with whatever it is to a level without too much discomfort. And then I say after that, like you need to, I'm going to be very like straight with you, like competing is not going to be an option. Like you need to, if you actually want to get better, if you actually want to get to the point where you can actually compete in the future at the level that you want to, this might mean that you might just need to have 3 or 6 months, as you said, like an off season, where like you're not having to compete, or you're just focusing on trying to actually get yourself better, rather than focusing on what the next goal is or anything like that. The next goal should be actually getting better. And it doesn't mean to say that just by rehabbing it just gets you pain free. Like the amount of times that we always say, and I think we've said this on previous podcasts, like how you're trying to rehab someone and you're actually trying to just get them better than they were pre-injury anyway. Like, because you've found all these weaknesses and you found all these issues that potentially might have led to this point. So if we can try and fix all of that, you might be able to actually get them not just to where they were, but where they were, like, even better. And I think trying to word that to someone is hard, but if they understand that, they then become so much more compliant. But it is very, very difficult when some people do have, they go, okay, so I've got this comp this day, I've then got in 2 months' time, I've got this comp, and then I've got this, and then I've got that. And I'm like, firstly, this is a lot. Like, it's a lot to try and to have to put your body through. It's not just the actual competitions as such, it's also the training that goes towards it, the mental stress that goes into it as well, like, which all can have a massive impact on how you're dealing with your injury. And again, I'm sure we'll go into it, but like, a lot of things I always ask is about stress, life, what else is going on, how's your recovery, this, that, and the other, and how all of these things influence. And they're like, oh no, like, I'm fine. And I'm just like, no. Like, that is a massive influence. Like, it's a massive influence on how things can be. And I've always, the main bit of advice would just be like, as long as you've given the advice that you believe is true, and you stick to yourself and what you go, right, I personally think that this is what the plan should be. You shouldn't train, or you shouldn't do this, or you shouldn't do that because of X, Y, and Z. As long as you said it, it's then up to them. Like, if they want to listen to you, they can listen to you. If they don't want to, that's fine. Like, it's on them. As you said, like, they can do whatever they want with their body, but at least you've given the advice that you think is morally the best, but also
Mm.
like evidentially, like, correct as well. Like, if you think you can sit there and say, right, subjectively and objectively, you taking a bit of time away from training and actually just focusing more on rehab is actually going to be more beneficial for you in the long term. But if they ignore you, at least you've said it, and if they ignore you and it's got worse or it's not got better, you told them not to do it. So if they just go against you, then that's not on you.
Told you so.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
No, I think you're right. And at the end of the day, there's always a risk-based decision to be made, and it's for them to make. And for some people, if somebody's a professional athlete, it's how they make their living, then maybe they will take some chronic pain to,
Yeah,
get that bag. But you need to, yeah, like you say, give them enough information so they can make that trade-off decision themselves. Because, if you're gonna, yeah, ruin your ability to walk to win Sunday league game of football, it's probably not worth it. But if it's to win the World Cup, then
yeah,
maybe you'd think about it.
yeah,
And one thing that I say to a lot of people to help make this make sense is the same things, the same movement patterns or issues or dysfunctions that lead to injury also hold back performance. And I think when that penny drops for a lot of people, it gives them a little bit more perspective, a little bit more buy-in of like, I'm not going backwards, I'm not making progress. I am just winding things back and building better foundations for a higher peak later on. And if people can see that bigger picture, then quite often they
yeah,
will, yeah, have a bit more patience than they might have done otherwise, where a lot of people see rehab or movement mechanics as not proper training.
yeah,
And if it's designed and programmed correctly, it can actually be the most effective training that somebody can be working on to improve their
yeah,
performance. I actually was chatting to Jake Douglas, who's been to the CrossFit Games a few times, and he was saying that after one of his injuries, he worked on his movement mechanics because he was getting pain, especially when snatching and overhead squatting. And he just did tons and tons of movement mechanics, hadn't snatched for ages, went to a comp, and he hit, I think, 140, having not snatched over 100 for months and months and months. All he had done was his movement mechanics. But because his body was working better, he was able to put out a huge number because his body was actually working better. And people think the only way to improve your snatch or like, improve it is doing the snatch. And that's true to an extent.
yeah,
But for some people, the lowest hanging fruit or the weak link in the chain can just be your movement patterns.
Yeah.
And if that's linked to an injury, then it's almost certainly holding back your performance as
Yeah.
well. So having the, I don't know what the word is, but like humbleness or something
Yeah.
along those lines,
No, I get
just
what you're
dial
trying to
things back
say. Yeah. It just
and
having that
yeah.
time to just be like, okay, let's just actually like figure things out a little bit. And like, because it's also like a lot of athletes probably have that time where they've got to reflect on the season or being like, okay, what went well this season, what didn't. Like, you're going to have times where you're gonna do that, and it's kind of like a lot of the time a lot of people will be like, right, okay, I had this injury or I had this niggle or that didn't move very well, and why did that, like, let's say a CrossFit, like, why did that workout not go very well but that one did, like. And it's kind of like being like, right, well, what can we do to adjust that? And like, for example, with him, he's literally just probably spent like 4 months just focusing on that, not taking himself away from training, but that was his priority. And he
Yeah.
then come back and just absolutely smashed it. Like, mental. And he just had that commitment as well. But it's interesting you said that, because I actually had a patient in yesterday, and she's been having like, she's been lifting for like 3 or 4 years, and she's had, her first injury was like a shoulder problem, then that kind of went away, then she had a meniscus surgery, and then she's been having on and off like hip problems both sides, and it's just, there's just loads of things going on. And I treat one of her friends. Her friends was like, "You got to go and see Tash." So she came in yesterday, and I had like the most interesting movement assessment with her. And the one thing that I kind of found, and I was like, I feel like this actually could be the thing. I was like, there's just one thing. And so I literally just got her to do, so her thoracic rotation was just not great. And it was in the direction of the side where of the shoulder. Um, there's lots of stuff. But anyway, we did a thoracic rotation exercise, and the problem that she was getting is that she was squatting and she was shifting over to the left. She was hiking in her right hip. Like, she felt really unstable in the squat, and she felt like she was always just pushing off more through her left leg than her right, or whatever. It just felt really off, and also had a bit of discomfort in her upper back when she did it. Um, and we literally just did one set of this thoracic rotation, and she went, "That felt amazing." And I was like, "What? What?" She was just, I mean, I could see it visually was so much better. Like, obviously not perfect, but like so much better. She was like, I actually felt like I could push off both of my legs. And I actually felt like I was a lot more stable. Like, and all we did there was just do a thoracic rotation exercise for her to help improve her thoracic rotation to the right. And all it takes is, just as you said, just doing some element of movement mechanics and just trying to get your body to move better for you to then feel so much better in a squat. And that was only just with one thing. Imagine what like a month period of her doing movement mechanics is going to feel like for her squat and her snatches and her cleans, which is where she's having the problems. And it's just trying to get people to see that can be hard, but when you get those effects like almost immediately, sometimes that's a very good way of showing people like, this can work and this can be beneficial for you, because all we've done is that one little thing and that's already changed it.
Exactly. Yeah. And if it's getting her to squat off both legs rather than one leg, her squat performance is going to go up. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
No brainer, but it's hard to see. I think people see it when they go from in pain to out of pain or discomfort to comfort, but it's harder to quantify when you feel good and you feel better. And yeah, I think training performance plateaus are some of the situations where this application is most powerful, where somebody's been doing the same thing for a really long time, and then you improve the way that they move, and they have a quantum leap of just unlocking a new level of performance because their movement patterns are now so much more efficient.
Yeah.
Even if there's nothing wrong, it's just more efficient.
Yeah.
The team is playing better as a system, and yeah, that's a really cool story.
Yeah.
And what was the other thing? There's one other thing I want to talk about there and come back to. It was, yeah, just the integrating with training. I think that's a really important piece for working with athletes because, like you say, if somebody else is coaching them, then having harmony between what you're prescribing them from a
Yeah,
movement mechanics perspective
yeah.
and what they're prescribing as a training program is really, really important. How have you? I remember you saying on the previous podcast that you have one coach that you have a few clients in common with. When you don't have the luxury of having that strong relationship with the coach, how have you navigated that in the past?
But most times, like it's not. I guess it's not ever been an issue. As such, there have been a couple of occasions. Because sometimes a lot of people who like they have a coach and they're kind of it's very easy. Like they'll have the movement mechanics and rehab, and that's kind of like their warm up, and then they do all the other stuff. Sometimes it is a communication between through the athlete, so from me to them to the coach, and be like, could you let them
Mm,
know? It's just a bit harder to kind of make sure that we're getting the right outcome for the athlete. There have been a couple of occasions where there was one patient, one athlete, and she'd she just was just getting such bad lower back pain, and we had suspicion of a disc injury, and I just kind of she gave me her coach's number, so I just said to her, so that I was like, it's just so much easier for me to just be able to speak to him directly. And so I just sent him like a message and a voice note to be like, these are the things that I just don't want her to be doing in training. Like, obviously, with CrossFit, I guess the benefit is you can still train, but there's going to be certain elements of it where you're not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. You can still work on other things, but like lifting was a no because that aggravated it. Any kipping work on the bar, like on the rig, um I can't like any deadlifts and stuff like all of this hingy sort of stuff, and then going into hyperextension, they both were aggravating her lower back. So I just said, right, we're just bringing that back for now while we work on this X, Y, and Z and the rehab, but you can still do all of these things. And the week after, I saw her doing these kipping ring toes to bar, and I literally was like, it was on his social media, and I was like, I messaged her and I was like, why are these still in your like I was like, are you doing these like off your own back, or is this in your program? She was like, well, it was still in my program. And I literally just messaged him. I messaged him to say that these are the things to not, and it just got, and so I messaged him and I just said, hey, like, I'm really sorry. But I've just seen on social media that she's doing these, like, this isn't going to benefit her. And I said this in the above message. And like, he was like, oh, so I just hadn't removed them. Sorry. And I'm just like, so I was like, sick. I was like, sick. This is great. Um, and sometimes it's frustrating because obviously the hard work that you like I might put in, or any other like therapists or clinicians or anything like that you might put in. Sometimes you might clash. You might clash. Like we didn't with this guy. We didn't clash, but he just didn't fully listen to me, and he just didn't put what I had suggested into practice, and it was just frustrating. But I would say 95% of the time, whenever I speak to a coach or I have a conversation with a coach, it is positive. Like, it's very much like, okay, we can have a long chat. Like, even like speed, for example, like, we, I still treat quite a lot of Ronin people, and we end up having one the other day. He came into an appointment with one of the athletes because he was downstairs just having a coffee. So I was like, right, can you come up? And we then ended up having a long chat, like 20-minute chat between the three of us of how we were going to make it work.
mm,
And it was great. It was really positive, and like she felt loads better. Like Speed had a good idea. I knew, I was like, right, this is what we're going to do, and these are our markers, blah blah blah. And because we were all there having that conversation, it was great because we know what the plan is and we're all going to work together. It's the same with the other guy that I've said that I speak to, like every 2 weeks on a Thursday. We have a phone call and we have a catch up about all the different athletes that we have in common. So I think there's about 6 or 7, and we literally sit down and go, right, X, okay, Y, like what are all the things, maybe you should add this in, maybe you should add that in, these accessories would be good. He'd then be like, oh, I have added some of these movement mechanics in at the beginning of their session, should I take them out or shall we merge it? And I was like, right, no, you keep those in, I'll take these out of my side of it, and then we just rejig and we just move it all around, and like I end up learning, they end up learning, and that is the best part. Like if you can create a good like relationship with the coach, I actually think it is so much better for the athlete as well.
Massively. Yeah, completely agree. And I think people who have a coach are already at an advantage because they have somebody looking out for their
Mm,
programming and ideally would be able to adapt things around the injury or whatever they're working on in their mechanics at the time. And I think that the thing that I was reminded of as you were talking there is one of the challenges that I found most with people is when they do generic programs. So a lot of people will have a program that they pay for, but it's generic and not tailored to them. And obviously they're cheaper because there's less human time required. But then the burden of adaptation becomes much higher
yeah,
because they're essentially, yeah, they're uncoached, so they haven't got somebody who's able to make those decisions for them, and they as an athlete don't have enough understanding to make adaptations for themselves. And that's a big part of the reason why I think so many people end up doing all of it. Like a lot of the mentorship graduates end up being coaches as well as clinicians, or
yeah,
they're already coaches and they add the rehab and the movement mechanics to their toolkit and their service offerings, because then you have one single joined up version of the truth, and you take that burden off their plate. Because yeah, especially in the generic programs it's very difficult, but there are a couple of instances where somebody has been coached, and I've been on the other side of this where I've been coaching somebody purely as an athlete and they've gone to see a physio, and then we have clashed because
yeah,
he was trying to remove a lot of things that I thought were unnecessary,
unnecessary, yeah,
and yeah, and adding in a lot of, for want of a better phrase, like bullshitty rehabby exercises, which were just not really
yeah,
addressing what's going on in their body.
yeah,
And then that's a very difficult position to be in because you don't want to put the athlete in the middle of a domestic between you and the other person, whether they're the coach or the rehab person.
yeah,
So having trusted people in both directions, I think, is very
yeah,
important. And yeah, I guess trying to bring it back to what would be helpful advice is building that relationship. Like you said, I
yeah,
think if you are able to invest the time to connect with somebody, have a common point of view, and you're both bought in on developing the athlete in their best interests, then that's an amazing thing to be able
yeah,
to offer. But the downside of that is it obviously does require a lot of coordination and time to
yeah,
bounce the ideas backwards and forwards. So
yeah,
I think your setup's
absolutely,
really cool. You have a regular catch up.
yeah, it's great. And I think it's just a lot easier for us to make sure that we're on the same page. Like, and again, it at the end of the day, when someone is very adaptable and very understanding of what I'm trying to get for the athletes, etc., and they are too, it makes it just so much easier. Like having that phone call and having that catch up and being like we're completely on the same page. That is like obviously the most ideal situation, isn't it? But it's when you have situations like like you said, like it's very hard to then try and be like, well, this is why I think this. And then it's kind of, again, it's similar back to what we said about when you approach the athlete in terms of like, it's up to you what you want to do, but this is my advice. It's kind of the same, I guess, because you can give your advice and you can say, look, like, this is what I think. You're the coach. Like, I'm not going to sit there and tell you what you can and can't do, but this is what I think is best. If they go against it and then the athlete doesn't get better or something happens there, it's like, okay, like I did say
Yeah.
like that I don't think this is wise, but at the end of the day, as long as you're always doing what's best for the athlete and what you think is best, there's nothing else. You can't control what other people do, you can't control what their decisions are. And I think it is harder because you do sit there being like, I just want this person to get better. I just want them to be able to perform better and this, that, and the other. And people are just getting in your way. You're just like, damn. But you can't control that. You can't control it. So as long as you're sticking to your guns, you stick to your gut and you stick to what you believe is right and what you think is best, then you can't control anything else. And if it doesn't go in the way that you want it to go because people have gone against what you've said, then that's on them. That's not on you.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. I think in every situation, somebody needs to have the authority to make the executive decision. So there's been instances where the athlete decides what happens, instances where the rehab person decides, and yeah, probably more often than not, the coach has the overarching say. And yeah, I think if that's the case, then there's a lot of responsibility,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's what they're getting paid for, I
Exactly.
guess. um, cool. So we've got what makes athletes easier, what makes athletes harder to work with. What are some lessons that can apply to everyone? So what have you learned from working with athletes? What are the things that go really well that if we applied those lessons to Gen Pop, they would actually benefit as well?
Oh, good question. Um, I think with Gen Pop as well, like we have touched on it briefly before, is that just because athletes are maybe whatever they're coming in for, they are at a higher level, higher performance, etc. It doesn't mean to say that what someone's coming in for isn't a high performance for them. So I don't know, like you've got your new mum, like your 34-year-old woman who has just become a new mum, and she's now struggling to pick up her baby. For her, a high performance is going to be bending out and picking up her baby. So how are we going to try and get that better for her to be able to do like that's her like top performance, because at the moment her back is in bits, she cannot even bend over, she's in so much pain. And I think that's where you can then still always apply it back. And it's difficult because you are trying to think of the level of like what muscle groups you're using to the extent of how much you're using each muscle group. Like obviously if it was me picking up a baby, I'd be like, okay, cool, like that's fine. But if you told me to go and like try and deadlift 200 kilos, I'm like, that's a lot, even for someone who does lift weights and this, that, and the other. So it's like trying to figure out what their top level is for the where they want to get to, and how you would then adapt it. Um, what can you repeat the question again, Ash?
Yeah,
What
no, I
was
think that's a good answer. I was basically asking, like, what are the lessons we can take from working with
oh,
athletes
okay, that is
that
fine.
we should apply to Gen Pop to benefit them? I think that's a really
Yeah,
great one. That yeah, athletes, I guess, have a better idea of where their thresholds are
yeah,
because they know what numbers they can hit. They know what their PBs are. They can feel it if they're not able to hit their numbers. So we have a very clear idea of where to pitch rehab training because
yeah,
we know what's possible and we also know where they are today because they're usually quite on top of their numbers. But that's a really nice example for the new mum in that you have the goal of lifting her child without pain. And the thing we can take from the athletes is establishing where she's at now, like what sort of
mm,
weight can she pick up in awkward
yeah,
positions with maybe a bit of wriggling to navigate as well. And how can we essentially use progressive overload
yeah,
to put stepping stones between where she is today and where she wants to be eventually, hopefully at a rate faster
yeah.
than her child puts on weight.
You'd be like, I could do this now, but now my child is a kilo heavier, and you're like, okay.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think there's another lesson in there that's just come out is that framing it in terms of what it enables you to do rather than just avoiding pain. I think that's a great thing that
Yeah,
athletes teach us is that they're focused on their performance. So what are we enabling through improving their movement patterns?
yeah,
And I think the general person focuses a lot on their pain and what they can't do.
yes,
Whereas if we frame it as we're going to let you play with your child without worrying about pain,
yeah,
that's a big carrot to move towards rather than just focusing on the negative and the pain and what you don't want. um,
And
I think that's a valuable lesson as
and
well
I
from
and I
athletes.
think as well with Gen Pop, as you said, it's kind of linking on to that. To them, pain is pain, whether that's an 8 out of 10 pain or a 2 out of 10 pain. And to them, it's still pain. Whereas I find that athletes can differentiate between that a bit better. They can be like, right, I'm still in pain, but actually the pain is a lot more tolerable. So I can feel like I can load this a little bit more, or I can tolerate this a bit more, or this, that, and the other. Whereas to Gen Pop people, pain is pain. And it's almost like there's no scale. Even if there is less pain, they're just like, well, I'm still in pain. And I'm like, okay. So then having the conversation being like, okay, always asking them to rate it is definitely something that I'll always try and do, is because I've noticed that over the years, some people will just say that it's just pain is just this, that's just what this is. But there isn't that scalable thing, and being like, oh, well, actually, I'm still in pain, but actually, I'm able to sleep better. I'm actually able to bend over without the pain. But when I'm sitting down, that's when the pain's on. It's kind of like, well, that's better. Whereas, and I think athletes can, I find most of the time, can differentiate being like, well, actually, I was able to go through a whole training session with probably only about a 2 out of 10 pain and kind of push through it. Whereas before, like, I wouldn't have even been able to pick up a barbell. So I feel like that's progress. And I'm like, yeah, it is great. So it's kind of like having that, as you said, more negative mindset. I feel like Gen Pop, and it's almost like that living in fear a bit. Whereas I think athletes are kind of like, no, I think I can push this. And it's kind of like, but then the negative of that is being like, when do you push through that sort of pain? And then that's just another whole topic. But it's
Yeah,
that's kind of the way that I can see it a lot in Gen Pop versus athlete as well.
that's a really good one. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it in that way. But yeah, both athletes being used to and not freaked out about training with a bit of
Yeah,
pain can be a great thing, but also the precision with which they're able to identify the triggers. I think I've sort of taken that for
yeah,
granted because whenever you're in a consultation, you're chatting through it, you ask them pointed questions, they can almost always answer like, yeah, it's fine actually with heavy deadlifts, but if I do high volume deadlifts, then that's the trigger.
yeah,
Or if I sprint, then it's bad, but if I jog, it's not bad. Like all these sorts of
yeah.
things, they've usually found those patterns and they have a much higher level of body awareness. So
That's yeah,
trying to take some of that to the Gen Pop, I think, is where we can help them better. Is
yeah,
yeah, just almost steering their thoughts to be like, okay, over the next week, I want you to be conscious of when does it hurt the most? Is it better in the mornings, or does it
yeah.
get better over the day? Or those sorts of things. Athletes usually have those answers to
Ready. Yeah,
hand, whereas Gen Pop, yeah, you need a bit of prompting.
yeah. And I think it is, especially with Gen Pop, like as you said, it's kind of like, oh well, I just notice it when I'm sitting down or when I'm doing this. But it, especially when athletes come in, and as you said, they've already got an idea of what's going on in your head. Well, I you probably get it as well. Like I then start thinking, okay, well, they get it in like high volume stuff rather than just one like heavy deadlift. It's more like when they do volume work, or when they do this, or when it's on a longer run rather than a shorter run, or this, that, and the other. And it's just like, okay, is it more from a power perspective? Is it more from a fatigue perspective? Is it more from a strength perspective? Is it a more stability perspective? And then you start thinking, right, okay, how am I going to structure this rehab to progressively get it to the point where they can overload in that sort of thing? So like there's obviously there's always going to be a benefit to you getting things stronger, but if it's more when it's under fatigue, it's not necessarily being like, okay, we could don't they don't have to go and do let's just use a split squat for an example as part of the rehab. Let's just use it as a really simple one. You don't need to be going to do super heavy split squats if during their run they are, it's when they're fatiguing towards the end of the thing. You almost need it to have a bit of resistance, but you need to go get them to do it to under fatigue, because that's going to be more specific to what their problem is. like if you then fix that and then they start noticing, well, actually it's like now that's better, I've now noticed this, okay, we can then adapt it to make sure it's more from that perspective. But there's no point in giving them really strong legs if it's actually more working under fatigue, which is where they're struggling. And it's trying to make sure that you can find that difference, whereas Gen Pop that you just can't. They'll go, I just hurt, and you're like, brilliant, okay. You're like, that's, we've got a lot of work to do because I don't know what's going on. And I
Yeah,
think that is the
that's
big
very
difference, is you can create such a better picture with an athlete, whereas with Gen Pop, like, and I do tend to find, especially from like a chiropractic perspective, like you do get a lot more medical history with Gen Pop people. So like different types of medication or history of surgeries or other illnesses or like any just pathologies that are going on that also could obviously impact everything else. So that's just a whole other can of worms to unpick with them. Um, Whereas with athletes, you don't, the main big thing that you would probably have to struggle with is like surgeries, let's say, because they've had a previous injury or whatever. Whereas I find with Gen Pop people, you get more of the other stuff that kind of come with it. Again, another can of worms, but um, it's different. There's a lot of, it's very different on how to approach it as well.
Yeah, that's a really good example. I love that one where we've got you could have two people with the same knee injury, but depending on what their goal is, the way you would train and rehab them would be completely different. And your example is perfect there in that if somebody is a marathon runner, they need an enduring knee without necessarily the highest forces going through it. Whereas if somebody is a weightlifter, they might do 6 reps through that knee in a competition, not 26.2
Yeah,
miles. So the things that you're rehabbing them towards will vary greatly. And I guess the lesson there for Gen Pop is that if you can be very clear of what you're rehabbing them towards, it could be picking up a baby, it could be, walking up the hill to the shop, whatever it might be, you can then make your rehab more targeted to what's going to benefit their life
yeah,
most rather than the old school like cookie cutter PDF of generic
yeah,
knee exercises, which we
yeah,
know and hate. So that's good. Um, very good. So, uh, in terms of assessments, I think one thing that would be really useful for people would be to talk through how assessment approach is the same and how assessment approach is different when working with athletes, because there are obviously going to be some things that you do almost for everybody, but then there'll be some things that you adapt in one way or
yeah,
another. I'm leaving it a little bit vague there to tee you up. Like, do you want to
yeah.
riff on that?
I'm gonna try not to ramble too much. um, so you're gonna get your like your normal standard assessment for everyone that walks through the door will get your normal assessment of just observing, like range of motion, palpation, special tests, muscle testing, etc. When we're like kind of in the room, um, seeing how muscles feel, blah 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 blah. Like that is very generic for most people, and I will still always do that because it still gives me information from feel, touch, how tests are coming back. Is this probably more, let's say, more of a shoulder impingement? Is it potentially like a labral tear? Like blah 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 blah. Like that just gives me a bit more of an idea. When it then comes to more the movement perspective side, as I'm finding things, I then change how I assess them, basically. So I, for example, like whatever sport they're coming in for, I will make sure there's always an element of that sport that I want them to come in. So if someone's a golfer, like I actually quite like them bringing in a club, because it's looking at how they grip the club. Again, there's a lot of times that I'm learning about sports as well. Like even though I know what the sport does and how they move and stuff, there's also little things that they then tell me about, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. Like I thought it was this, and they go, no, you actually want to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. So then you're trying to learn about a sport that you don't know. Whereas like if it was like a CrossFitter, powerlifter, weightlifter, runner, I'm like sick. I know most of that, but I still like learning about all the different sports that I don't know everything about. I know how they work, I know what they do, blah blah blah. But I try and make sure that I incorporate a lot of stuff into the movement assessment where it is then specific to what they've done. So everyone will get a normal movement assessment, but then again, let's use the example of it was under fatigue that they really struggle with. So okay, let's do like a test for your lateral hip under fatigue, and let's just see how long you can actually hold something for, to then see, okay, right, when that's then under load, not even just your body weight, like how are you then actually able, like that's probably why, like if you can probably only hold that for like 5 seconds, no wonder that you're struggling under fatigue. And then, or for example, being like, right, if it's like a strength thing, it's trying to adapt, like, right, if we do like an ISO hold, that's a nice one that I quite like doing sometimes in an assessment, because it's just seeing what they can tolerate to a certain weight where just they're just holding a movement rather than having to go through contractions through their muscles. But like, even for example, it's they struggle with snatches but they don't struggle with jerks. Okay, let's have a look at that grip on the bar. Let's have a look at how you're moving in, like not just an overhead squat but like a muscle snatch, power snatch, full snatch. And they, a lot of people sometimes struggle, they're fine with power snatch but they struggle with a full. And it's kind of like, okay, the difference between there is the depth. So it's kind of like, right, is that, that's not going to necessarily be a shoulder thing, that could be more thoracic and hip, because that is a, like you're in a deeper range through your hips. Okay, so now let's look more deeply into what's going on in your hips. Are you not sitting into your hip as much? Okay, let's have a like a, even though they've come in with their shoulder, obviously I'll still do everything, but we'll go more into what's going on around that hip. And then we'll do again fatigue work, we'll do stability work, we'll do X, Y, and Z. And it's as even using the example of what I saw yesterday, we tried loads of different things, and the things that I was expecting to come back as were not what came back. Like from what she told me in the room when we were talking through all the injuries and the history and everything, in my head I'm thinking, all right, oh, this is probably going to be unstable a bit, and that might be a bit tight, and this, that, and the other. And we did the assessment, and it was the complete opposite to what we actually expected when we actually did the movement assessment. And then we tweaked quite a few things. So, for example, sometimes the one kind of linking to something that we said before, showing them that these tweaks can work will get them a bit more on board as well. Is sometimes, like another patient I had yesterday was, she really struggled grounding her big toe when she was lifting. And that we literally just did that with her deadlift. And she had no, she came in with shoulder pain, but we just got her to ground herself with her big toe, and she was getting shoulder pain with her squat and her deadlift, and she had no pain, like the first time in like ages. And she was like, well, that doesn't make sense. And I was just like, wow. And then I explained, and then I said, okay, well, we'll just take it away, don't think about it, just do your deadlift again. And the shoulder pain came back. And it's trying to, again, make it more specific to the sport, showing them these are the changes that we could make which could make it better. And everyone is going to be different. Like someone might just not be able to like evert their ankle correctly, and all we need to do is just make a little tweak there, and that actually might have an effect up the chain. And it's just trying to make sure that you're making the assessment as specific to that person as possible, because there's no point in me doing like a full like running analysis or something on someone if they don't run. There's not really much benefit to that. But if they're a weightlifter, you've got to look at them squatting, you've got to look at them overhead squatting. It's not just front squat, it's back squat as well, because that completely changes the mechanics of someone because of how the shoulder position, see, the shoulder position and how their thoracic spine's positioned as well. Like that can tell you a lot about how someone's moving just from being from a back to a front squat. And it's again making sure that you've listened to what they've said and what you're finding you actually act upon, and being like, okay, well, that is not what I was expecting, so why is that? And then you kind of, you figure out, it's being like a detective. like no case is the same. And as much as, and I think we've said, like, obviously you get a lot of CrossFitters and weightlifters who come in with very similar injuries. You get the common sort of injuries, but the reasons why they're having that is going to be different from person to person. And the reasons why they're struggling and they're in pain is going to be different from person to person. So that's how you've got to adapt your assessment to them. Um, yeah, I have no idea.
It's a really good answer. Yeah, so much good stuff to unpack in there. I think the key takeaways for me are that the specificity of assessment, in that you are investigating the problematic movements for them in their sport. So that in itself is a big set of clues. Like you said, what kind of squat is triggering? Is one better than the other? Is it powers or is it full depth with the Olympic lifts? All that sort of stuff gives you clues towards what might actually be going on, and also what are the success criteria for successful rehab. Because if they're fine power snatching, then obviously you don't need to change anything with the power snatch, but the full snatch you would need to change. That's now our acid test for whether the rehab is successful. And the other big theme I think is beneficial for people to take away is that you are looking for movement qualities. You're not getting them to pass or fail a specific
Yeah,
test. And I think that's the limitation of a lot of movement screening methodologies out there, is that they might have a certain number of specific tests and then they just grade you. I'm thinking of FMS in particular, which I think I'm a big fan of Gray Cook, but FMS is very limited in that there's 7 tests and you get graded 1, 2, or 3 for each of them. But the relevance of those tests varies massively depending on who's in
yeah,
front of you, whether they're an Olympian or they're an old age pensioner. But secondly, the intensity doesn't get enough respect, in that some athletes might be able to pass all 7 of those tests, scoring 3 in all of them, but they still have issues when playing their sport because their sport is at such high
yeah,
intensity. And that can be, like you say, the endurance component or the load or the speed. So when we're doing our assessments, we want to be looking for those movement qualities, like you said, for example, lateral hip stability, but lateral hip stability in the context for that athlete. So is it heavy? Is it like very high amounts of force that it's got to deal with? Does it need to be enduring? Does it need to be reactive at speed? All of those things need to be factored into the assessment, because they could pass with flying colors for the generic stock standard version of that test, but that doesn't mean that it holds up in sport at the end of a long match, for example. So I think that's a big lesson for
yeah,
assessing athletes, is that the generics tests are a great starting point, but we do need to adapt them in the direction of what that
yeah,
athlete needs to do with their body. And the same goes for the Gen Pop people. I've had a lot of questions about this on the mentorship, where mentees might work with the elderly or disabled people or something like that. And you can scale the assessments back in the same way that you can scale them up
yeah,
for athletes. So all of them can be regressed to simpler versions where we're still assessing the same movement quality, but we're just asking for slightly
yeah,
less of it so that we can test them in a context that's relevant to the non-athlete as well. Where, say, somebody's just had a bad injury and they're learning to walk again, the amount of stability to get those first pain-free steps is going to be a lot
yeah,
less of a requirement than an athlete
yeah,
performing at a high level. So I think having a good understanding of the principles and the overall movement qualities that we're testing is the meta skill that allows you to assess well. Whereas I'm not such a big fan of people having just a short list of specific tests that everybody must pass, because some of them might be
yeah.
completely irrelevant and some of them might not be at a dose high enough to be appropriate for that
No,
athlete.
and it just makes it very like, it just still makes it very generic. It doesn't make it adaptable or specific to what someone's coming in with. So everyone's then almost tarnished with the same brush, but they're not. And everyone's at different levels at different points of what they're trying to achieve from their like competitive career or whatever. Like it doesn't, there's a place for it, I guess, but I wouldn't say it's the most optimal at all. And you're not considering everything that that athlete is trying to do and why they're in pain. Like again, we can go back to whether it's a strength element or if it's a fatigue element. Like it's probably not going to take into consideration that either. So
No,
um,
definitely not. Like the most of the basic screening systems out there don't pay any
no,
respect to that sort of thing, and yeah, would have no difference rehabbing an endurance athlete or a strength
no,
athlete, which are opposite ends of the scale. And equally for an old age pensioner who's in the early stages of post-op rehab, it also would be expecting them to act like a reasonably
yeah,
fit and healthy middle-aged person, for example. So
yeah.
yeah, I think that's a really good takeaway for people. What are some other common mistakes when working with athletes or working with Gen Pop people?
I would say it's not. It's, I guess it's mistakes, and it's also like a learning curve. I definitely find it with both people, and I kind of guess it contradicts something that I've already said. Is sometimes you get a phase, and I don't know if you get it too. Sometimes, like where you do get a lot of people who are coming in with a similar injury, and you then find that they've got the same sort of stuff. So you then end up giving them the same sort of rehab and movement mechanics, and then you're like, I've just given the same, but this the same to the like my person yesterday as I'm probably giving to the person today. And it's trying to find that line of being like, that's not wrong because that is still this that they will need that sort of stuff, but remembering as you're progressing that rehab to get it more specific to what they actually came in for. And that is one thing that I've really tried to make sure that I have bettered myself in my assessment and in my consultations, is making sure that those goals are understood from that patient, being like, because that's I think sometimes where I'd go wrong a little bit before, and I'm happy to admit that, like, because you're everyone's always learning anyway, but you try and you go, okay, well they're getting knee pain in squatting, so let's just try and get that pain free, but it's not making it as specific to that person. And I think that is a mistake that a lot of people go through, again, especially as you're probably still learning. And I guess sometimes I probably still do it now, to be honest. Like there's going to be times where I'm just like, I probably got that wrong, to be honest, and I've probably given them something that's maybe a bit more advanced than they probably can tolerate at the moment, or maybe I didn't give them the right cue. um because there's some, like, let's use a hip hinge for example, like just trying to get them to hinge better. A cue for one person is not going to be the same cue for another person. And you've got to realize that everyone is going to understand what you're trying to say to them completely differently. And I think that's going to be, those are the two main takeaways, is making sure that you're not trying to give, just because people have got the same like movement mechanic issues, and the same sort of injuries, does not mean that the rehab's going to have to be exactly the same. And also making sure that the way that you're cueing and you're instructing them to do this rehab is not exactly the same as well. Like there's some people who I'll be like, right, you've got to really focus on trying to send the hip back towards a target. Like that's a generally like a good one for a lot of people. But sometimes that doesn't work because they just shift their whole weight back rather than actually just sending the hip back. So then I'm like, okay, we're going to add in. So that person, I'm like, right, we're going to add in a reach, because by adding in that reach, it gets them to understand that they're going this way, rather than just the whole body
Yeah.
going that backwards. And it's just, that's a good
Yeah.
example that I can think of, is kind of thinking, right, okay, how is that person going to understand what I'm trying to get them to do so that they do the movement mechanics correctly? um those are just from my experience. But I think another mistake that I actually had a conversation with a patient yesterday about, was, I think a lot of clinicians, as you said, you get those pieces of paper and they just send them off with their rehab and stuff. The one thing that I have always said that I will always do is go through the rehab with the patient in person and video it and everything like that. And I know that might maybe seem time consuming or whatever, But what I find is I'm able to talk them through an exercise, which, like, some of the exercises we give them, as I said, it's silly lunge club. Like, everyone is sat there being like, "That's a really weird thing to do," but okay, I'm going to do it. But if you just sometimes just give them like a random video without the cues that they need, they then might spend the next 3 weeks doing it wrong. And so for me, talking, I'll show them, I'll talk them through it, and then I'll video them doing it while I'm cueing them, because then they're actually able to perform it correctly because they can listen to what I'm saying, how I'm cueing them, and they then get a feel of like, oh, that's how it should feel. And I think we definitely touched on this last time. But it's being able to make sure that they get an understanding of how the exercise that you've given them should feel, and the outcomes of it should be like what the outcomes of it should be, rather than them being like, okay, I'm just going to do this like lateral hip lunge, and they just kind of are like just flailing around like a tree or something, like, and they're just like not really getting the benefit from it. And again, like initially that was something that I think was in the beginning phases, as I would do send them out an exercise of me doing the thing and then they would go and copy it. But again, I might be able to perform an exercise better than they can, so they're trying to do exactly what I'm doing, but they might not be at that tolerance. So I'm just kind of like, in that, when they're in the appointment and we're going through the rehab and I'm watching them trying to do this exercise that I prescribed them, I'm like, okay, what I want from this is for you to just get the stimulus rather than the range. So if you're feeling that through, let's say, your lateral hip at X range, that's where your range is to start with. And you then slowly want to progress and increase the range. Like, so the idea of this exercise is to slowly try and increase that and get more stability there, rather than you trying to force it and then lose the actual stimulus that we're trying to get you to do. And I think that sometimes you also need to be adaptable in terms of what if you've written down the amount of times I've written a rehab plan down, and we then start going through the exercise, and actually the exercise is fine for them, like they actually, it's too easy for them to do at that point. So I'm like, okay, well, we need to already advance this without me even starting the rehab, because you actually can do that quite well. Or have the expectation of being like, that actually is a bit too hard, so we need to scale it down, because you're not actually there yet. As much as I thought from the assessment you might be, you actually probably not. So we need to actually just bring it back a bit, and learning that what you've written down isn't what the rehab should be. You should actually, and that's why it's so important to go through it with that patient in person, because you get that feedback straight away. So you know, okay, the rehab I've given them is what they can tolerate and they can do right now, and then we can adapt it accordingly. Because again, if you've given something that's too hard for a patient to do and they've done that for 3 weeks and they're just like, it was too painful, so I didn't do it. It's like, it's better for you to give them something that's maybe not to the level you want them to do yet, but they've actually got a stimulus and they've got something from it. Then you can come back in and be like, okay, now I can give you the actual exercise I wanted you to do. Okay, yeah, that's a lot more tolerable now, and I'm only maybe experiencing like a 1 or 2 out of 10 pain. Fine, brilliant, like, you can carry on. So I think it's just making sure that you're not you're not just going from your own script. You have to adapt to what's in front of you as well.
Yeah. Yeah, really, really good points there. I think you reminded me of something that one of my old teachers used to say, which is that we're all the same and we're all different. And it goes back to the point of giving the same exercises to different people. And maybe to make you feel better about it, is that I do that. I have done that and I still do that quite a lot, because there are so many
Yeah,
similarities for people who do the same sports, who do the same movement patterns and overuse the same parts of their body or underuse certain parts of their body. So there are some fundamental movement qualities that most people need, or maybe I would go as far as say all people need to do certain sports, to do certain movements. So if they don't have those fundamentals, then everybody should get some work to establish
yeah,
those fundamental movement qualities, and there will be a lot of similarity. But I really liked what you said after that about the tweaks and the individual cues, because that is essential. It's not just important, it's essential for people to get the right training stimulus. And your hinge example is perfect, because like drills I'm thinking of, like hinging and pronation
Yeah.
drills are the ones that come to
Hmm.
mind, and that people can mess up a pronation drill in 100 different ways. So having the right things for them to focus on and having them understand the success criteria of doing a
Yeah.
good rep is, you can't really send them a generic video. If you did, it would probably be half an hour long to walk through all the things that you do want to happen, all the things that you need to avoid happening, and then they'd just be tied up in knots trying to get it right, focusing on too many different things. So having the personalized cues, you know, prescribing hundreds of people pronation drills isn't wrong, because most people could improve the way that they pronate, and that leads to so much other good stuff upstream. But I think the key point, or the best one you made in there for me, was the dosing for the prescription. In that, I guess for Gen Pop, actually it goes both ways, but it could be for Gen Pop, it could be for athletes. The risk is overdoing it or
Yeah.
underdoing it. And I think it doesn't always fall one way or the other. You can definitely underdose Gen Pop because you're trying to wrap them up in cotton wool a bit too much, but you can also
Mm.
underdose athletes because where they need to get is actually very advanced. So you're improving the way that they move, but the intensity is never high enough to have good
Yeah.
carryover into the sport. But then it does also go the other way in that you might treat a gen pop person like an athlete and get them training a bit too hard, and it's actually just beyond them. And you also get athletes who push their rehab way too hard as well, and they end up
Yeah.
exacerbating things as well. So it's always a really delicate balancing act to find that right dose. But I think that is probably the common mistake. And I think your, how would I describe it? Like your agile,
Yeah.
responsive approach, where you are titrating things based on the feedback you get from somebody. And I think having that conversation up front is also
Yeah.
super helpful to say, look, this is where I think you're at. This is the rep range I want you to work in. If it starts flaring up or aggravating the issue, then we're going to dial it back. If you get to the top of this rep range and it's too
Yeah.
easy, then we can look to advance to a more aggressive progression. That's the way I
Yeah.
typically handle it. But it is very much, that's the art side of things rather than the science side of things, because as you said earlier in the podcast, there's so many other
Yeah.
factors that come into it: their stress, their hydration, their sleep. That can be a big factor into what triggers
Yeah.
a flare up or some
100%.
inflammation as well.
And I think it, like, even again, I had a patient recently and um, he just went on a boys' weekend away. And he came in on the Monday and he was so honest. He was like, I'm really sorry if today, like, I'm really tight. I don't do well with the rehab or anything like that. He was just like, I know I am so severely dehydrated from the weekends and I'm really, really tired. I've not slept very well. And well, like the fact that he was honest about it, I was like, well, it doesn't for me. Like, everyone's allowed to have a life, but also like it was true. Like when we were doing the assessment, everything was just a lot more tender. Like his muscles were tighter, he was a bit more sensitive. And then when we were doing the rehab, it was just so much effort for him to do. But he was just like, I'm gonna do it. He was like, it's fine, but I'm just, and I was like, it's fine. I was like, it is what it is. But like that, it just shows, like, just by him, he was honest about it. Like it really isn't a big deal, but it just shows that those sorts of things can influence how your body feels and how you are able to do your rehab as well. Like you're not going to get the same sort of feedback if you are really stressed, really tired, you've had quite a bit of booze over the weekend, sort of thing. Like it's all these things have the different level of impact of how your body feels. Because he was like, my lower back's really sore today, and I was like, okay, we know why. Like we know that that's probably why. And you've also done like 4 hours there and back traveling, sat down. Like of course it's going to feel a bit achy and a bit sore because of all of these factors. But he knew that, and it's just trying to make sure that a patient would understand that, like anyone would understand that as well. Like he came in with that very strong self-awareness and he was like, I know that this is why. There's some people that obviously don't have that.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of another client who on a Monday morning, it would always be worse because he liked to drink and dance, and both of those were triggers for his knee pain. So yeah, it all blends together. I think that's a nice place to wrap things up. Any closing thoughts on athletes versus Gen Pop?
Um, just as much as they have, how would I word it? As much as they are very different, they also are very similar. So you can still use all of the movement assessment stuff with a Gen Pop, because it's still, as I said, you've got your like your new mum who's having to pick up a baby, and that's a completely new, different stimulus that they're not used to doing. And you've also got your like a 50-year-old man who bends down to pick up something from the dishwasher and his back goes. Like all of these things are very applicable to both groups of people, but you've just got to understand that you have to adapt them according to their goals, the stimulus of what they're actually trying to achieve, and how you actually structure your rehab. Like, just because you can do the same for both does not mean that the rehab is the same. No person's rehab is the same, or their movement mechanics. And you've just got to make sure you understand that person as a picture, as a whole, what they can tolerate and what their end goals are. And that's just how you would have to just adapt it as well.
Stuff.
You're very
Thanks
welcome.
for your time, Tash, and I'm sure
Perfect.
we'll
Thank
hear
you
from
very
you again
much.
soon. If you'd like to learn more from Tash and I, we will be hosting a hybrid clinician workshop in London on the 22nd of November at Revival PT Studios in Hammersmith. We're going to be covering a lot of what we've discussed in the last few episodes, talking all about how we can use movement mechanics to complement traditional manual therapy practices like chiropractic, osteopathy, and physiotherapy. You're going to learn some fundamental and advanced movement assessment techniques and learn how to turn the findings into fixes. So, exercise prescription and programming to manage somebody's rehab journey all the way through to a full return to sport and reduce the chances of injuries reoccurring. The link is in the description below, and there are a limited amount of early bird discounts, saving you up to £100. So please grab your ticket as soon as you can, and I hope to see you there in London.